determination of income and employment. In this, we have lots of chapter to study. Today, I will be taking up one chapter from this unit, which is called as Aggregate Demand and its component. This is the first chapter in this unit. Before we go into this chapter, we need to study the meaning of two terms. First one is ante, and we have ex post. Okay, now what is this ex ante and ex post term, and what is the difference between these two? Ex ante means planned. We can use many other words to describe this ex ante, planned, or we can say expected, anticipated, estimated. All right. Whereas ex post means actual, real one. All right. Now, I'll take up one example in this to differentiate these two terms. Okay. So, I'll be using this concept, expenditure. Ex ante, expenditure, ex post, expenditure. Now, what does it mean? When we say ex ante expenditure, it means planned expenditure, expected, anticipated, estimated expenditure. All right. And ex post is actual expenditure. Now, in this, to differentiate between these two, again, I will be using a very simple example. Okay. See here, if I say, I am planning to spend. Okay, I am planning to spend this much amount on purchase of goods and services. This will be my ex ante expenditure. Okay. Second one is I have spent this much amount on the purchase of goods and services. Then this will become ex post expenditure. Now, is it clear? Ex ante expenditure is showing what? Planning. Plan expenditure. Okay. Whereas ex post expenditure shows here expenditure which is already done. Spent. Alright. Now, in this chapter, not only in this chapter, the remaining chapters, which is included in this unit. In all the chapters, we need to take this. Is that clear? Okay. Whatever comes, not only in this chapter, but in rest of the chapter, we have to take this ante, or we can say plant, for further theoretical exploration. Is that clear? Okay? Okay. Now, hope the difference between these two is clear. Now, we go into this chapter, Aggregate Demand and its component. The first concept in this chapter is about aggregate demand. We need to study the meaning of aggregate demand here. So, concept aggregate demand. Now, what is this aggregate demand? It means, we can say, it is the sum total of expenditure that people plan to spend or plan to incur on the purchase of final goods and services which has been produced in an economy during 1 year is called as aggregate demand. So see here what is given. It is the sum total of expenditure that people plan to incur on the purchase of final goods and services that has been produced in an economy during 1 year is called as aggregate demand. Now look at this. What is given here? Expenditure, right? And this expenditure is what? A planned expenditure. Okay, so what is it? It is a planned expenditure. So this plant, or we can say it is ex ante expenditure. Which means what? When we say it is a planned expenditure, it means what? That the people are planning to spend on the purchase of goods and services. So that is called as planned expenditure. Right? Now see here, I have written here expenditure. That is planned expenditure by whom? By people. Now, when we say people here, it refers to certain sectors. Okay, we have certain sectors that are planning to spend on the purchase of final goods and services. And who are those sector, or who are those people that we are going to study in the components of aggregate demand? Is that clear? So in this, for sector, I will be using people here. Is that clear? Okay. Now what is it? See here. I said aggregate demand is the total planned expenditure. Okay. By whom? By the people on the purchase of final goods and services. It is not an actual expenditure. Okay, I said it is not an ex post expenditure. It is ex ante expenditure. All right. Now, to measure aggregate demand of 1 year, so what we have to do here, we have to go for, or we have to look into the total planned expenditure of such people. All right. Okay. Okay. Now, this aggregate demand can be also called as aggregate expenditure. This is also called as aggregate expenditure. So, the meaning says, right? What is given in the meaning? It's a planned expenditure. We need to measure the expenditure in order to measure aggregate demand of a country. Is that clear? So, aggregate demand can be also called as aggregate expenditure. All right? Okay. Now, this aggregate demand or expenditure, it depends upon many factors. But in this chapter, we have to study aggregate demand in relation to this. What is this here? Income. Okay. This is income. Income is indicated. Income is represented by this Y. Okay. So, we need to study the relationship between aggregate demand and income in this chapter. Although this aggregate demand depends upon not only this factor, but we have lots of other factors. Right? Is that clear? Okay. So this is a brief description on the meaning of aggregate demand. Next one, we go into the behavior of aggregate demand. All right. So we will study about the behavior of aggregate demand. What this behavior shows, or what are the things that we have to study under the behavior of aggregate demand. So this is behavior of aggregate demand. So I said before, we need to study AD and its relation with income. AD depends on income. When we talk about the behavior of aggregate demand, it means how AD changes as per income changes. So now what this behavior shows? It shows, or it implies, the relationship between AD and income. All right? Okay. Now this relationship can be studied by using a schedule, which we call it as AD schedule. Okay. Now schedule. In economics, this will come again and again. Okay, schedule. What is the meaning of schedule in economics? It is a table which shows relationship between variables. Is that clear? So now under this one, what is this aggregate schedule? Again, so I said AD depends upon what? Income, right? So in this schedule, we have to show the relationship between these two. So the meaning of aggregate demand schedule, it's a table which shows AD corresponding to different levels of income. In an economy. Is called as aggregate demand schedule. All right. So again, through table, we are going to learn about the relationship between AD and income. All right. Okay. So what is this AD schedule? A table which shows AD corresponding to different levels of income in economy.